Welcome back to my channel. You may be asking, how many videos have you recorded on holiday? To be honest, I've lost count. What I haven't lost count of though is the amount of teams I'll be rating in today's podcast. 17. 17 seems like a bit of an odd number, you might say, but if you times it by 2, you get 34, and that is what we hit in terms of subscribers. Maybe not 34 exactly, 34,000, but I do appreciate every single one of you that has supported the channel over the last couple of weeks and throughout years, really. It has been a long journey, you could say. I've been making FPL content for over 5 years now. The same goes for UCL Fantasy and other games along the way, like the Club World Cup, the World Cup, of course, and the Euros too, across 2 editions actually. On screen you can see Martin Dúbravka. His price is 4 million and the ownership has soared. It's currently 26.3%. Following his move to Burnley. He should be the starting goalkeeper for them, and I think he'll be the perfect backup, and you could even start him in game weeks like Game Week 2 against Sunderland at home. And I did put a graphic of him in the promoted clubs video, but when I recorded it, guess what? The transfer didn't even happen yet, but at least you got that information from the get-go, and the same goes for other bits and bobs that have happened, because you know how football is. It's a fast-changing environment, and you get injuries, suspensions, and things that happen, transfers, so things can get out of date very quickly. But if you have watched all of my content, you'll be well prepared for Game Week 1 and you'll be in a great position to tackle the upcoming season. Like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so you're always up to date with my content, whether it's for FPL or UCL Fantasy. And keep your eyes peeled for the Game Week 1 deadline stream on the 15th of August, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and championships, furloughs to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League and Spotify can also be found in the description. And the Discord server is the place to be at. That's where people got a heads up about the rating your teams video being a thing, and most of you have sent in your teams through the Discord server and a couple through Instagram and Twitter as well. But let's get straight into it, talking about your teams, and I'll be highlighting the things I like and dislike about your squads. The first team is sent in by Wasif, who says bench boosting Game Week 2, going all in on DEFCON. And there's a lot of red in this team, just like my shirt, headphones, and you could even say me. What is redder? Let me know down in the comment section below. But Wasif has Sanchez in goal as a 5 million goalkeeper. That's going to be very template, partnering him with Martin Dúbravka, who is the backup. Virgil van Dijk, Milenkovic, Gabriel, and Agbadou completes a starting backline with Salah, Gakpo, Rodgers, who is currently an injury doubt, Cole Palmer, and Anderson, who is there for the ball recoveries. Fulkrug is up front, and the bench comprises of Anderson, Strand Larsen, and Evanesson. So I actually like the 2 forwards you have on your bench. Maybe not so much for Game Week 1, but I think long-term that could definitely play a part. And Strand Larsen scored against Man City at the Molineux last season, so he could definitely score a goal or create something in Game Week 1. In terms of the captaincy, I agree with Salah. A lot of people in this video are going for Salah as their captain, but that might have changed a little bit after Liverpool's loss in the Community Shield final, where Salah played terribly. He missed a penalty and a huge chance. So I think people will always kind of like deviate and change their drafts last minute, but Salah is not someone you want to be messing around with going into the season opener. But I do like your midfield. It's extremely strong, assuming that Morgan Rodgers is available, and that's something I'll talk about in my updated lineups and also in the deadline stream. But Agbadou in your starting 11 is something I just can't really recommend. I think Anderson, Strand Larsen, even Evanesson, they'd all be much better to start in your team than Agbadou, who can get some defensive contribution points, but I think Man City will win quite comprehensively with 2 or 3 goals, and they might even keep a clean sheet in the process. But I think Agbadou should be on your bench, and I would start either Strand Larsen or Joachim Andersen, in my opinion. In terms of the Game Week 2 bench boost, I can see that working quite well. I'm not a big fan of Fulkrug as a pick, though. So as you can see now, this is the Game Week 2 team, and I think that could work very well actually. Get the bench boost out of the way, and then you can focus on the longer term, taking money out of your bench and then putting it into your starting 11. Whether you do that with free transfers or wildcard early, that remains to be seen. But I think Agbadou is someone you could definitely improve on, and at around 4 to 4.5 million, there are much better defenders like Renido Mandava, Esteve from Burnley, and countless others that I've discussed in my promo clubs video, the budget players as well. So I think Agbadou is the biggest weakness in your team, but I think Fulkrug is the other one I'd probably look to displace, and beyond Game Week 2, he's someone you'd probably want to bench more often than not, despite West Ham's promising fixtures. So those are the 2 players I kind of highlight as the weaknesses in your squad. I do like the rest of it. Even Joachim Andersen, who was quite poor last season in his debut Fulham campaign, upon his return, you could say, to be fair, but I think he could be quite decent for defensive contributions, get the odd goal and some bonus points in the process. So he's not a terrible pick, and I think your goalkeepers are absolutely fine. I've currently got that sort of set up in my own 15-man squad, and I do like your defence in general. Gabriel played against Athletic Bilbao. He started the game and he played really well, actually. I would expect him to start against Man United. There is going to also be a debate about Virgil van Dijk to Frimpong, which is something that we'll talk about in the next couple of days, but I think Frimpong might be worth a shout with Bradley out of the picture at the moment. He wasn't in the squad against Crystal Palace in the Community Shield final, so I think Frimpong might be worth that sort of attacking potential over Virgil van Dijk, but the rest is looking really strong in my opinion. The second team is by Ridu, who also puts a comment in the Discord server, and he said, I don't know what to do with Saka. Well, to be honest with you, having him third on your bench isn't what I'd recommend. I'd definitely start him actually against Man United. He has a good record against the Red Devils. He's only scored once at Old Trafford, I believe, but he also got an assist in his first ever game there. And I think Saka looked really sharp against Athletic Bilbao with a goal and an assist. And what we saw more in that game is Arsenal being direct. They slightly tweaked their system to a 4-2-3-1 with Zubimendi and Rice as the holding midfielders, Odegaard as the number 10, Gyökeres up front, and then Martinelli and Saka. And what the signing of Gyökeres allows, I think, is for teams to not double up on Saka as often. So he has more space to operate. He can take on the opposing fullback 1v1, and more often than not, he will beat him or at least create a chance and do something to impact the game more frequently. But in terms of your team, Verbruggen in goal is absolutely fine as a 4-point family and goalkeeper, but I would start Robert Sanchez, and one of my only kind of clean sheet predictions was actually for Chelsea to win 1-0 against Crystal Palace. Wan-Bissaka, Frimpong and Gvardiol looks like a really solid defensive line. My only concern is Gvardiol, because a lot of Man City fans think that he could be benched and we could see a centre-back partnership of Stones and Kusanov, or perhaps Stones and Ruben Dias instead, and Ait Nouri as the left-back. Then having Anderson again, absolutely fine. I think he's one of the best 5-point family midfielders in the game. Florian Wirtz got an assist in the Community Shield final, and he's going to be a goals and assist machine for Liverpool. Marmoush is interesting. I think he has a good chance of starting against Wolves, but you will get the odd benching, which can be very frustrating, especially for an 8-point family midfielder, and Cole Palmer is definitely one of the best options around. But this team has no Haaland or Salah. It still looks really solid, but it is going to be a big risk, and in terms of captaincy, you're going to need to nail it on week after week to kind of keep pace with those Salah template players and then the somewhat differential Haaland captainers and those that have him in their squad. Your front line is looking quite solid as well, with Joao Pedro, Chris Wood and Danny Welbeck, and I think that looks quite unique and interesting actually. I know Joao Pedro is template, but having him alongside the other two is something I haven't really seen across other teams. Your bench is also looking very strong with Nico Williams, Konsa and Saka, so you could easily bench boost either in Game Week 1 or Game Week 2, and to be honest with you, Saka should be in your starting 11 no matter what. That's the way I look at it, but if you are kind of unsure about Saka and you're not really that, bullish about him beyond Game Week 2, then it might be worth displacing him. You can go to a cheaper midfielder. That could even be Bruno Fernandes, for example, or someone at around 7.5 million like Eze, and then use those funds to upgrade one of your forwards, or perhaps even go from Wirtz to Salah, or in the case of Marmoush, that could also work quite well for you, but it would probably require another change elsewhere, and I think Salah or Haaland would be highly recommended for your starting 11. Now, as I go through all these teams, you will see this expected points figure on the top right. That's according to the website FPL.team, which I'm using to present all of these teams on screen. And the expected points is quite low for this squad, actually, at 49.7, but it doesn't mean it's a bad one. I just think that all the algorithms will be highly recommending having one of Salah or Haaland in your team, and ideally you'd have both, but you always have to make compromises somewhere down the line. I like your goalkeepers. Could you invest a little bit less and go for Dúbravka over Verbruggen? That's something I would consider in your case, especially with my recommendation of starting Robert Sanchez. And I would probably change Gvardiol, to be honest, in your defensive line. The rest looks really good, but even Gvardiol to Esteve or a 4 million defender, then using those extra funds alongside the other kind of possible downgrade I recommended earlier could really help you acquire Salah or Erling Haaland in the process. The third team covered in this video is by John Harvey, who sent multiple teams actually, and this is what he currently has, I believe, in terms of there's no transfers being shown on screen and stuff like that. So this is what I've basically gone with, and he says the following: I know it's a lot. Yes, it was John Harvey, but one of those with a potential bench boost in Game Week 2 or 3. So that seems like a very popular strategy at this moment in time. Vicario is someone I would question in your defensive line, especially because you've got Van de Ven as well, and Spurs play 3 days earlier in the UEFA Super Cup final. So I think it's highly recommended to change your defensive line a little bit and not double up on Spurs. They did finish 17th last season for a reason, and they lost 4-0 against Bayern Munich in a recent preseason friendly. Wan-Bissaka and Gabriel looks really solid in my opinion, and you've got De Kuyper, who scored in Brighton's recent preseason friendly on the bench. I think that's a good option against Fulham at home, and Konsa long-term is a solid choice up until Game Week 8 and beyond, where Aston Villa are top of the fixture difficulty rating. Your midfield is also quite sound with Salah, Ndiaye, and Kudus. I'm not a big fan of Hudson-Odoi though. He actually featured in my Players to Avoid podcast, and at that price and below, I'd recommend Elliot Anderson, maybe even Daniel Marlin as a short-term punt, but his minutes will be all over the place to be fair. But I think Hudson-Odoi, he's not someone I'd really recommend in Fantasy Premier League. And up front, that's a solid front line. I have not many qualms about that. Strand Larsen against Man City in Game Week 1 isn't ideal, but he can still score as he did last season, and the other two are amongst the best forwards in the game. So I do like this 50-man squad. You've also got Xhaka in there, who can get some defensive contribution points, the odd assist, and I think it'll be a great signing for Sunderland. FPL-wise, though, I don't expect him to reach the heights he did in his last season with Arsenal, where he got over 100 FPL points for the first time in his career, and he got a lot of goal contributions playing in a box-to-box role for the Gunners, which unlocked his best version. But I do like this team. You've also got Jose Sarr as another goalkeeper, but I'd probably change both of them and go for something like Robert Sanchez or Sells, and then Dúbravka as your two goalkeepers, to be fair. But the captaincy is spot on. I think Salah or Haaland, take your pick between those two. I do lean towards Salah despite that poor performance against Crystal Palace, and Erling Haaland is a close second. The expected points of this team is 56.8. But next up is Jace, who has the highest expected points figure of any team featured, unless I'm stupid, which is possible to be fair. He has Robert Sanchez in goal with Dúbravka as the backup. That's going to be very popular, as I mentioned, with the first team. Virgil van Dijk, Van de Ven, and Nico Williams. I do like the look of it. You might want to reconsider Van Dijk to Frimpong potentially, or Milos Kerkez for the attacking potential, but Van Dijk will get more defensive contribution points, that's for sure. Salah, Palmer, Kudus, and Eze is a very strong midfield. Is it somewhat template? Maybe with the first three, of course, but Eze has around 10% ownership, and he's been brilliant for Crystal Palace in pre-season. And another strong front line, despite no Erling Haaland. Ollie Watkins is in incredible form right now. He has scored in 4 consecutive pre-season games. He's got an assist as well. Strand Larsen, I've seen him in quite a few teams actually, and at 6.5 million, I think he offers good value. He should be on penalties for Wolves as well. And Chris Wood, I do have some doubts about him this season. I think he won't be as good as the previous campaign. And Nottingham Forest are getting so many 0-0 draws in pre-season, and they've only scored like 1 goal, and that was scored by Chris Wood, to be fair. And he will get bonus points, but I think you can find better at around a similar price tag. Even Joao Pedro, Jean-Philippe Mateta, although you've got Eze in your team already. Now, it might surprise you to see Chris Richards feature. A few of these teams actually across this video will have Chris Richards first on their bench, and I think he could be quite underrated for defensive contribution points, but Lacroix and Munoz are worth the extra millions if money is no issue. And Dewsbury Hall offers good value at 5 million as a new signing for Everton. He's taking set pieces for them in the recent preseason friendlies. So I think Dewsbury Hall could be very interesting and save you 0.5 million on Elliot Anderson and these other options that you've seen in previous drafts. And Rodon is last on the bench. I think he could still cement himself as a regular starter for Leeds United alongside Biol, who will be available from Game Week 2 onwards. And we could see Pascal Struijk drop to the bench as a result. But 63 is a really high expected points figure for FPL.team. I do like Ollie Watkins with the form he's in, and Newcastle at home doesn't look great on paper, but I think Watkins can still be one of the best captaincy options besides the obvious Salahs and Erling Haalands of the world. Now, the 5th team I'm going to cover today is by Raiyan Shishir. Hopefully I haven't butchered your name. I do apologize if that's the case, but really good expected points figure, and I like most of your picks, but Alisson and Kelleher could definitely be questioned because Kelleher is currently an injury doubt, and in the case of Alisson, he is quite injury prone for a goalkeeper, and you can cover Liverpool defensively with Kerkez, Frimpong and Van Dijk, not in any particular order per se, but you can see the rankings, of course, in the best defenders video and podcasts. Having Romero in there is quite interesting, but I would recommend Nico Williams, for example, even though you've got Milenkovic in there already, but there is Mikalenko, who is currently an injury doubt. If he is available, he could also be someone worth bearing in mind, I just don't really like Romero at 5 million, and I'd rather just go for Van de Ven at 0.5 million less, and both of them are quite injury prone as well. Gvardiol is another one who could see himself rotated from time to time, as we saw in the Club World Cup, but the midfield is looking particularly strong. This is one of the few teams with Salah, Palmer and Saka that I've seen across any social media platform, and Minter is an interesting differential, which I do like the look of. Idingra at 5.5 can also step up the goals and the assists for Sunderland this time round. Watkins and Beto is also a good front line for Gameweek 1, but I do question the Beto pick in the long term, and he can be quite erratic with his finishing. But I have to say, those three midfielders, the premiums of course, and Saka, Palmer and Salah with Watkins is by far the best part of this team. And on your bench, you've got Reinildo Mandava and Estev, two of the best 4 million defenders in the game, and also Mark Guiu. So you've got some budget enablers who should get plenty of game time, and you can sometimes start them when needed. But I would reconsider both your goalkeepers, and with plenty of 4.5 million goalkeepers to choose from, and also Martin Dúbravka at 4 million, you can save some money there and then potentially upgrade one of your bench players, or perhaps one of Beto or Idingra in your starting 11. And remember, Romero to a 4.5 million option like Wan-Bissaka or Van de Ven could also help you in your quest to bolster other positions in your squad. But the next team is going to be by the only one, 2024, and he's got Keller in goal as his vice captain. I know a lot of you might not have actually switched your vice captain, but always ensure you do that, and preferably you captain a player from one team and then vice captain someone from the other, just in case. But amongst your 15-man squad, you've got João Pedro as your captain currently. I'd personally recommend Mohamed Salah or Erling Haaland, but it's completely up to you. But ultimately, vice captain one of those players at least if you really want to captain João Pedro in Game Week 1. Wan-Bissaka, Van de Ven and Robinson looks quite solid on paper, but Robinson hasn't featured whatsoever in pre-season, and I think Raiyan Shishir could start left back in Game Week 1, and then we'll see if Robinson gets back into the mix very soon. Ndiaye, Wilson, Salah and Kudus also looks very solid. Wilson, one of the most informed players throughout pre-season. Ndiaye's on penalties and he's facing Leeds away in the opening game, and Mohamed Salah, of course, we all know what he's about, despite some poor outings in the recent friendlies and the Community Shield final. But I do like that front line. That looks incredible. Erling Haaland, João Pedro and Victor Gyökeres, who scored his first Arsenal goal through a header, assisted by Martin Zubimendi against Athletic Bilbao. And on your bench, you've got Verbruggen, Konsa, Xhaka and Estev. So once again, you know my thoughts on these players as I covered them in previous teams as well. But I would probably focus on shifting your defensive line a little bit and making some changes there. I don't mind Harry Wilson as a short-term punt, to be honest, but his minutes could be a problem going forwards, especially when Robinson's back. Then you've got Raiyan Shishir competing with Harry Wilson on the right-hand side, but I think that's a very solid team, especially offensively. But maybe your defensive line needs more depth and maybe covering one of the top teams defensively like Arsenal, Liverpool, or perhaps even Man City. And I think Chelsea also enter the mix quite comfortably as well, given what they've done in recent months. But we've also got Deal, not me. I'm not making a second account and sending it in. He's just called Deal, DYL. And he's also got a comment saying, please do help my defense. I think your defense is looking quite solid, to be fair. You've got Robert Sanchez in goal, so you're covering Chelsea defensively. You've got Martin Dúbravka as your backup. That's absolutely fine. Tarkowski is going to be a machine for defensive contributions, and Van Dijk will be one of the highest scoring defenders if he stays fit. You might want to consider going to Frimpong or Kerkez, but that's completely up to you. And Arsenal defenders are still worth considering, but their opening fixtures are quite poor. And Van de Ven is probably my favourite Tottenham Hotspur defender to start this season, especially with a doggy out injured for the first couple of weeks, and it might even take a month or two. Ndiaye, Salah, Wirtz, Palmer and Anderson is a very strong midfield, and I've got a similar sort of structure with my current draft, and you can see that, of course, on my channel. And the front two is also very solid with Ollie Watkins and João Pedro. You won't find any complaints from me in terms of your attack. But if I had to nitpick, it would be about Van de Ven. You could change him to Wan-Bissaka or possibly upgrade him. That would require a downgrade elsewhere, since pretty much every single team bar one covered in this video is using up all of the 100 million budget, and I think that could be quite difficult since I'm quite happy with all of your other picks, to be fair, so you don't necessarily need to. But I think Van de Ven to Wan-Bissaka could work very well. I think he'll stay available more often than Van de Ven, get more defensive contribution points, and also more attacking returns. So I think Wan-Bissaka would be an upgrade on Mickey van der Ven. But if you are backing a Tottenham Hotspur clean sheet in Game Week 1, then I don't think that's a terrible pick from the get-go. We've also got Morpheus, EKMA. He has Sells in goal and Dúbravka as the backup. And on the bench, Diouf, Potts and Hoover. So some interesting options in there. I think Diouf could be quite decent, the new West Ham signing at left wing back, but the other two could definitely do with some work there. I do prefer Esteve and Renildo Mandava over Hoover, who has started several games for Wolves in pre-season. And Potts, I know he's a very cheap midfielder, and that's the kind of aim of it. It enables you to go for Erling Haaland and Palmer, for example, but I would possibly try to upgrade that if you can and stretch to a 5 million midfielder like Dewsbury Hall, or even 5.5 in the case of Elliot Anderson. Those are my favourites at the moment. Van der Ven, Munoz and Frimpong is absolutely sound, but of course you saw my thoughts on Van der Ven in the previous team, and the midfield looks quite strong as well. I think Minter is a punt, a bit like Harry Wilson and a few of those players. Daniel Marlon would be another. Kudus is template, but you could argue he's maybe not really worth the hype. He didn't really do that well last season, but a lot of us are expecting him to do much better this time round in a new environment. And Cole Palmer is your vice captain, and Erling Haaland has the armband. I think that's pretty much what I'd go for with your current setup. Watkins and Mateta up front is also really competitive. You got some nice double ups with Crystal Palace, Tottenham Hotspur and Liverpool, but you might want to reconsider the Tottenham Hotspur one, in my opinion. I think the main concern, of course, is the fact they have a 3-day sort of layoff between the UEFA Super Cup final and Game Week 1 against Burnley, so there could be a lot of rotation there. But overall, I'm quite happy with this squad. I think the bench, though, could do with a lot of work, especially in the case of Potts and Hoover, who are the two main weaknesses of this 50-man squad. But we also have Kevvy, who is sending his team, and he's got Raya in goal and Dúbravka on the bench. Dorgu is also there with Mark Guiu and Esteve. But in the starting 11, there is Diouf, Tarkowski, Milenkovic, Sarr, Indai, Palmer, Wirtz, Semenyo, Gyökeres and Erling Haaland. So a very interesting sort of mix here. I personally would favour Wan-Bissaka over Diouf, but I think that's still a fairly decent pick and differential. Having Tarkowski and Milenkovic makes sense, but in terms of defensive contribution points, I think Murillo will be better than Milenkovic once more. And Ismaila Sarr scored against Liverpool in the Community Shield final, and I like the rest of your midfielders. Even Semenyo, who has scored at Anfield in the past, and from Game Week 2 onwards, he could be a very decent differential at 7 million, but you've also got plenty of 6.5 million options, and a lot of them were covered, of course, across all of my videos. But you've got Florian Wirtz to cover Liverpool. One other possibility is downgrading him to Gakpo and then using those extra funds to make another upgrade elsewhere. That could be Dorgu to another 5.5 million defender, for example, or perhaps even someone at 5 million. But I do like the look of this squad. I think Dorgu is the one I look at and think, with United's opening fixtures, I know he got a goal and assist against Bournemouth in a recent preseason game, but I think he'd be the one I look at, and I don't really like the look of, to be fair. And I do prefer other 4.5 million defenders over Diouf, but overall, the structure is good, and I think it's quite dynamic, and you can change things depending on if certain things go wrong with one or two picks. But the front line is incredible for me. Gyökeres and Erling Haaland. Mark Guiu is the backup, and you've got some really good midfielders that compensate for the lack of Mohamed Salah. The expected points might be quite low at exactly 50, but I think that's a little bit harsh. And once again, FPL.team are very bullish on Mohamed Salah. Now, Fingon has also put in his team, and I have to say, the double up in the West Ham defence is something I would not recommend whatsoever. And Areola might not even start in Game Week 1. We could see the new signing Hermansen from Leicester City be the number one goalkeeper after some shaky performances by Areola in pre-season. So my recommendation is Wan-Bissaka to cover West Ham defensively, and that would be more than enough. If you still want Diouf, that's absolutely fine, but I wouldn't go for him and Areola or Hermansen in goal. You've got Dúbravka as the backup anyway, but facing Tottenham away, you'd rather avoid that in Game Week 1. Frimpong and Tarkowski, though, are excellent picks in the defence. And in the midfield, you've got some really good midfielders for sure in Salah, Fernandes and Gakpo, who is a nice differential for me. And Kudus, of course, quite template, but can do the job as well. And the front line, Bowen, João Pedro and Watkins is also not really template, but I think that's also quite nice. It's a good mixture. You're covering 3 talismanic figures for their teams. Of course, Cole Palmer would be the one for Chelsea, but João Pedro is second in line, and he has been brilliant for them in the recent preseason games, scoring 2 goals across 2 matches. And in the Club World Cup, of course, he made such a big impact, helping Chelsea lift that trophy. Now, Carvalho is interesting at 5 million, but I would prefer the likes of Dewsbury Hall from Everton, or for 0.5 million more, going for Elliot Anderson, as covered previously. Esteve is fine, but in terms of your 4 million Spurs defender, he's not going to get game time. You could get a cheeky start in Game Week 1 because they play PSG 3 days earlier in the UEFA Super Cup final, but Vuskovic won't get into that starting 11 over Romero and Van de Ven unless one of them gets injured, and that's where you can have that entry point into the Spurs defence at such a cheap price point. But until that happens, I would avoid Vuskovic, and you've also got Esteve in your team already. You might want to go for Nilo Mandava as your other 4 million defender, or Rodon Goodmanson from Leeds United, and to be honest, you could maybe upgrade that to a 4.5 million defender, and in order to do so, you might need to make a downgrade elsewhere, maybe do Kudus to Elliot Anderson, for example, and then use those funds to upgrade Vuskovic and potentially one more player like Carvalho to Elliot Anderson, and that would look much better. But the main concern here is that double up in the West Ham defence. Apart from that, it's also looking extremely competitive. We've also got DVE, who's sending his team through the Discord server. This is his updated draft, and I know a lot of you might have changed things since, of course, sending them in, but this is the time I'm recording it, on Monday, the 11th of August, and it will be published fairly soon. Verbruggen and Dúbravka are the two goalkeepers. I think that's fairly decent, and you're spending a minimal amount on the goalkeepers and spending it in the outfield positions, which I think is absolutely fine. You've got Murillo, Matheus Nunes, and Tarkowski. So I do like the two defensive contribution machines, but not so much Matheus Nunes. I think Rico Lewis could get some starts at right back, and some City fans think that will be the case against Wolves away in Game Week 1. But the midfield is also really, really good. I'd like the look of it, to be fair, with Palmer, Salah, Anderson, Fernandes, and Ndai. You've got defensive contribution points in the case of Anderson and Bruno Fernandes. You've got penalty duties from 3 of those players. In fact, 4 of them, actually. That really looks good. I know Bruno Fernandes could share some of the penalties with Matheus Cunha and Mbeumo, but more often than not, he will take them. Watkins and Strand Larsen, 2 really good forwards, especially in the case of Ollie Watkins. You've got Chris Richards on the bench, Esteve and Mark Guiu, and overall is looking really solid. But Matheus Nunes is the biggest weak link. I would expect rotation between him and Rico Lewis, and you've got a clash in Game Week 1 between Strand Larsen and Nunes that you might want to deal with, I think, with your final drafts, and then cementing yourself going into Game Week 1. But we also have Eduardinho, who sent in the following comment: good luck for the new season, Dylan. Likewise to you. If Vissa moves to Newcastle, I may put him in instead of Welbeck and replace Sarr with Marlon or Anderson. So I think that is pretty sound. With Daniel Marlon, though, his minutes are going to be all over the place, and I think if Rodgers is available for Game Week 1, you might want to put that in the bed, or nip it in the bud, as you want to say, and replace him with Elliot Anderson, as you mentioned. And you've also got Dewsbury Hall at 5 million. But Kelleher is currently an injury doubt. You might want to monitor that and maybe change him to Verbruggen or a different 4.5 million goalkeeper. I think Petrovic is good long term, but not so much against Liverpool away, of course, in the season opener. Milenkovic, Munoz and Tarkowski is a great defensive line. I really like the look of that. Munoz away to Chelsea is benchable, though, and you might want to start Aaron Wan-Bissaka against Sunderland away from home. But with Munoz, you've always got that goals and assist potential from wing-back positions. You've got Salah, Wirtz, Sarr, Ndai and Palmer. Once again, really like the look of that, and Sarr is a differential in the grand scheme of things. Welbeck and Watkins up front is also quite unique and different, but I think with Welbeck, he scored 4 goals in one preseason friendly, which was behind closed doors, but I think there are better options elsewhere, maybe at more expensive price points, and I think that's something you could definitely argue. But Brighton's fixtures are okay. They're not great. Danny Welbeck is quite injury prone. That is something I'd maybe reconsider, that Danny Welbeck pick. But in your starting 11, the rest looks really solid. Even Ismaila Sarr, who can be inconsistent, and sometimes he does well in the more difficult fixtures. And of course, you're starting him against Chelsea away. But I would start Wan-Bissaka personally. And if you were to replace Ismaila Sarr, I think Elliot Anderson is the way to go. Even Dewsbury Hall wouldn't be too shabby. And you can use those extra funds to then upgrade Danny Welbeck, as you say, to Vissa. That would be quite interesting if he goes to Newcastle. But there are also other interesting 7.5 million forwards like Joao Pedro, who is very template, but there is a good reason for that as well. We've also got prop account proto, I believe, if not actually proto. let me know down in the comment section below. But he also sent it in a message and he said, "This is with a plan in mind to move Bowen to Gyökeres in Game Week 2. With the 1 million in the bank, I'm saving for the potential transfer. Enjoy your holiday, pal." So there are only 2 teams, if I'm not mistaken, that have some money in the bank. This is one of them. And to have 1 million there is actually quite bold. But to go to Gyökeres against Leeds United in Game Week 2, that is a very strong plan. And I could see that working very well for you with Jarrod Bowen facing Sunderland in Game Week 1. Keller is someone I'd reconsider, but you've also got Kinski as the backup. I just go to Dúbravka, even though some reports indicate that long-term Kinski could be favoured over Vicario. You've got Virgil van Dijk, Cucurella and Nico Williams. That's an extremely strong defensive line, and I think those are 3 of the best defenders in the game. Salah, Palmer, Marlon and Anderson also looks quite solid, but I think Marlon isn't really anything more than a short to medium-term punt, if that, and his minutes will be all over the place. He only got 2 starts for Aston Villa since joining in January. Joao Pedro, Watkins and Bowen is a very good front line, and I think that is going to be up there amongst the very best. And of course, you've got that plan to get Viktor Gyökeres. Richards is on the bench again, which is quite surprising. Esteve and Aaron Ramsey. I know he's 4.5 million. And I don't really think there's really much more to it, but ideally I would stretch him to Dewsbury Hall or maybe another 5-point value midfielder. But I think that's the biggest weakness of this team, the fact that you've got a lot of budget midfielders in there. And whilst Elliot Anderson will get plenty of defensive contribution points, I'd possibly consider upgrading Marlon to a 6-point value midfielder like Ndai, and then Ramsey to Dewsbury Hall to give you more depth and options, especially if you want to bench boost quite early on, and also to give you different formations and flexibility, because I think with this team, you're going to be playing a back 4 very often, and also with Ramsey, he's going to be on your bench pretty much all the time, and you'd rather have that extra option in the midfield, an extra body to really maximize your points potential. The midfield is where the bulk of the points are at, and you don't want to jeopardize that, even though your defensive line looks incredible, as I said before. And you might want to consider changing both Kinski and Kelleher as your goalkeepers, but that's only if Keller is unavailable due to injury, and Brentford have plenty of injury doubts at the moment, including Kevin Schade in the winger positions too. Weiseng is up next, and he put a comment in through the Discord server saying, "The structure was a bit different, and I would definitely play it different and not boring. I'm open to having more big names at the back." So Matt Sells in goal, Dúbravka's the backup, fairly standard stuff, and I do like that Sells pick. You've also got Nico Williams though, so doubling up on that Forest defence is quite interesting. Of course, if people did that last season from the beginning, they would have done very well in those positions. Van Dijk and Wan-Bissaka completes the defensive line in terms of the starting 11. Richards is on the bench again, but Goodmanson is ahead in the pecking order. Salah, Gakpo, Palmer, Enzo Fernandez and Kudus would be the midfield, but the team that was sent in was basically a 50-man squad in the transfer section. I didn't see the starting 11, but this is what I'd probably go for in Game Week 1, and you might even want to start Goodmanson over Enzo Fernandez, for example. Joao Pedro and Watkins up front, and I would captain Salah and vice-captain Palmer from your 15-man squad. But in terms of changing anything, maybe Enzo Fernandez to a different midfielder, for example, Ndai, and then using that extra Chelsea slot to go for Robert Sanchez in goal instead of Matt Sells, so you can diversify your defensive line a little bit more, but maybe your plan is to go for that double up in the Forest defense, and I don't think that's a bad strategy, and I do like this sort of setup. There's no Erling Haaland, and you do have Salah, of course, who is quite template, but you've also got a few different things about it. I think the Forest one is what separates you from the rest of the pack, probably more than anything else, actually, because Joao Pedro is also another template pick, and Gakpo over Wirtz is a differential way of playing Game Week 1 and really tackling that opening fixture against Bournemouth. The expected points is also one of the highest of any of the teams covered at 62.1. I think Salah is going to be one of the main reasons why, but Enzo Fernandez is someone I'd maybe reconsider. I think he's a good FPL pick in isolation, but I'd rather have that Chelsea structure of Joao Pedro, Palmer, and then Cucurella defensively, or maybe going for Robert Sanchez as your main goalkeeper. But we have 3 teams left to cover, and one of them is by Chase. He also has Matt Sells in goal, with Cucurella, Wan-Bissaka, and Mickey van der Ven. Palmer, Salah's the captain, Wirtz, Kudus, and Ndai, Joao Pedro and Watkins up front. And to be fair, I think maybe you've got the vice-captaincy on Palmer anyway, but that is something I'd recommend if you haven't done so already. Dúbravka's the backup goalkeeper. Mark, Guiu, Konsa and Esteve, pretty standard stuff, and I do like it for pretty much every single part, actually. The starting 11 is looking good and competitive, but I do have some preferences in terms of Van der Ven. Ideally, you'd go to a Farmian defender, maybe like Nico Williams, and then go from Matt Sells to a different goalkeeper in this case. But doubling up on Forest or Chelsea defensively wouldn't be too shabby. Probably Chelsea is out of the question for you since you've got Palmer and João Pedro in your setup. So that would enforce another change and you don't necessarily need to do that. So I think you're in a good position and you're almost set for Game Week 1 and this will be a solid foundation for the opening part of this season. But I would reconsider the Van de Ven pick and you have plenty of options at 6.5 million or below like Elliot Anderson, and you can use those extra funds to make any other possible upgrades that you're maybe thinking of in Game Week 2, 3 and beyond. But even just for Game Week 1, if you want to bench boost quite early, that could work as well in your favor. Now we've got Metab who has 0.5 million in the bank. The expected points is 59.2. Keller in goal, Dúbravka on the bench, Dorgu and Bruno Fernandes in the starting 11. I don't mind Bruno Fernandes whatsoever, but Dorgu is someone I wouldn't recommend right now. And you've got plenty of other 4.5 million defenders. Even those at 4 million, like Renilo Mandava, might be more appealing from the get-go. Konsa, Cucurella and Gabriel forms a back four. Salah, Palmer, Kudus and Fernandes, though, is a great midfield. João Pedro and Watkins up front completes a solid attack. And I think that front line will get you going through most game weeks. Renilo Mandava, Mark Guiu and Ramsey are on the bench. So once again, I'd probably reconsider some changes defensively and maybe with your goalkeeper if Kelleher is still a major doubt against Nottingham Forest away. But Dorgu is the biggest weak link. I think Konsa is someone you'd want on the bench for Game Week 1. Then you can start him every now and then and he can get some defensive contribution points. The odd goal here and there, but probably until the end of the season, you're going to be looking at 2 or 3 goals maximum. And I think Cucurella is one of the best defenders to start this campaign, so I think that's a great pick. Even Gabriel, despite Arsenal's fixtures, will get plenty of returns through goals, bonus points, clean sheets and defensive contributions, but I think really that defensive line needs some work and maybe your bench. Renilo Mandava is fine, Dúbravka as well, and Mark Guiu will be nothing more than a cheap forward, and it also prevents that team selection headache with 8 attackers. And whilst that would be good for a bench boost, for example, it can cause a lot of bench points along the way, and ultimately a lot of us will be looking to bench boost early, take money off our bench and then put it all into the starting 11, and that's where Mark Guiu comes into play. But I would change Dorgu to a different defender as covered throughout this video. Konsa will be on the bench ideally, and I would possibly consider going for a different goalkeeper than Kelleher, and that could be another 4.5 million option like Petrovic. And of course a lot depends on Kelleher's fitness, because if he is available then I would rank him higher than Petrovic in Game Week 1. But maybe you can go to Sells as your family and goalkeeper here to cover Nottingham Forest defensively. Otherwise you can do that by going from Dorgu to Nico Williams, and I think that 0.5 million you have in the bank could definitely help you to make that upgrade. But the final team is by Barry B, and he has Sanchez in goal, Van Dijk, Wan-Bissaka and Nico Williams, Salah, Wirtz, Palmer, Anderson and Ndai, João Pedro and Watkins up front, and a bench of Dúbravka, Konsa, Richards and Mark Guiu. I like the look of it. I also agree with the way you've structured things, your captain and the vice captain as well in the case of Cole Palmer. I don't think Watkins would be a bad idea, as some people in terms of the previous teams have also done, even over Cole Palmer. But yeah, the bench is looking decent. You've got squad depth, but maybe not too much, so you don't have too many benching headaches. And I think overall it's looking in a very strong position. You might want that exciting wing back in Frimpong or Kerkez, because Van Dijk's defensive contributions might be a little bit overstated actually in the grand scheme of things. But Elliot Anderson could definitely do a job in your starting 11 week in, week out, delivering 4 to 6 points actually as a result. And you could start Konsa from Game Week 2 onwards, and Anderson can sometimes be on your bench. Chris Richards is also here at 4.5 million. He could be quite underrated, but I do prefer him over Dorgu, for example, who was in a few of these teams. But I do like the look of this, and in terms of improving it, you could introduce some Man City and Arsenal players in the coming weeks, especially with the Gunners in Game Week 2, and Man City have good fixtures overall, but the rotation will be a key issue. No team is perfect. Every team will have their kind of deficiencies, maybe lack of certain options, and they will also have their areas of improvement, and that's what I've done in this video, highlighting the things I like, some things I'd possibly change, and also keeping in mind certain injury updates that have happened over the last couple of days. But this team is just under 60 in terms of expected points, but that wraps up 17 squads that I've covered in this video, going through all of them in the Discord server, Twitter, Instagram. I was on the beach and compiling all this list and having it all on FPL.team ready to go, of course, for this video. And going into Game Week 1, I'll be rating more of your teams in the deadline stream, covering all the updates in terms of injuries, covering stats, the top 10 captains, you name it, and we'll be in a great position to tackle the season head on and build a solid foundation from the get-go. If you haven't already, join my Discord server because as I was recording this video, a long-time viewer of the channel, Arthur Nice, sent in his team, and that's how he can feature, and this will be a bonus team and an Easter egg of sorts. So he's going to bench boost in Game Week 1. Vicario, Pedro Porro and Van der Ven forms a defensive triple up for Tottenham Hotspur. Gabriel and Gvardiol complete this defensive line with Cherki, Palmer, Gakpo, McNeil, Bowen, and Joao Pedro. So multiple differentials in here and a bench of Raya, Tarkowski, Rodgers, and Watkins. So with Morgan Rodgers, the injury might not be as serious as first feared. So some scans look quite positive, but we'll see how that kind of progresses over the coming days. He didn't feature in Aston Villa's last preseason friendly against Villarreal, but that was to be expected, to be fair. I think that Spurs triple up defensively could work really well, of course. I think Spurs are top of the clean sheet odds actually for Game Week 1, but I'm still not a huge fan of it, especially long term. You might look to wildcard fairly soon and then, get off Spurs entirely, but my preference with Spurs would be the midfielders like Kudus and Solanke if he's fit, playing up front. I also think you've got a few rotation risks in the case of Cherki, and also I think McNeil is fine, to be fair, but Ndiaye is my preference in that Everton attack. And of course with Rodgers, it all depends on his fitness, and even Gvardiol isn't nailed on to start, so I would reconsider some of those picks, but I do get it. It is very different, and if Cherki does get that Game Week 1 start against Wolves, that could be a great differential, and he was covered in the Club World Cup actually with predicted lineups and also in my coverage of the best assets in that game. And I think over time he will be a starter for Man City, but it might not be the case in Game Week 1. The rest looks incredible, especially Bowen with Joao Pedro and also having Gakpo in there. So there is no Salah or Erling Haaland, and that facilitates this strong bench boost and 50-man squad, but I would reconsider the triple up in Spurs defensively, and it wouldn't surprise me if some of these players were benched because they play PSG in the UEFA Super Cup final 3 days earlier, but that's something I've emphasized across all of my content. You have Jarrod Bowen as your captain. It's between him and Palmer for the captaincy from your starting 11. I think with Salah and Erling Haaland, not having them means you need to be spot on with the captaincy, and that's going to be one of the biggest kind of fears and also challenges you have, but you can still be in a great position with this bench boost after Game Week 1, but I'd probably change some of the kind of rotation risks like Cherki and also trimming down that Spurs defense to probably 1 for me, but you can still stick with a double up if you're still quite bullish on a clean sheet and on them starting against Burnley. Thank you very much for watching this video and listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it or find it insightful, then like this video, subscribe to my channel, and also hit the notification bell so always up to date with my content, whether it's for FPL or UCL Fantasy, which will return by the end of this month. Follow me on X, Instagram, and Blue Sky, Dylan RCM, and check all the links in the description for my Patreon and the championships, further access to my videos, amongst many other perks. The Discord server, FPL League, and Spotify can also be found in the description. I'll see you very soon for even more preseason content. Let's get this video to over 100 likes as we close in on new goals like 35,000 subscribers, and keep your eyes peeled for the Game Week 1 deadline stream.